Thank you. Thank you for your trust, Thank you for actually giving me the opportunity to moderate it. Our panel is called Trust and Development. The way to build trust for better cooperation in top policy and at regional level. So we'll talk about trust, about something more abstract, not so practical, not so material. So we've already talked about it at the conference. We've already raised these issues, and we know how important it is to have this established relationship, established trust between people and trust between institutions and people. So I'd like to present our panelists. So we have Monica Brezzi, Head of Division for Governance, Indicators and Performance Evaluation at OECD. Monica, nice to meet you. And we also have Ms. Sofia Opatska, Vice Rector of Ukrainian Catholic University and also founder of Ukrainian Business School. So Ms. Sofia, you're welcome. So good morning, dear participants. And also Olena Stashkina, philosopher, professor, historian at National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. Ms. Olena, good morning. And Andrea Colomizer with us, head of Priyutivska municipality. So, Andrei, good morning to everyone. Okay, you can see that we have very different participants, different speakers. We have a representative of OECD, international organization, and we do have a representative of one of the biggest and one of, let's say, one of the prominent Ukrainian universities. We have Olena also with us, who is a prominent writer and philosopher, and Andrei. He'll tell us about this practical experience, field experience, about decentralization, about governance and municipality experience. So I think in this 3D format, it would be definitely possible for us to give this comprehensive picture, and we'll we'll demonstrate whether there is a trust in Ukrainian community today. Let's start with a global perspective. I'd like to pass the floor to Ms. Monica right now, and I'd like her to tell about this context of trust in a broader aspect, a more general aspect, where Ukraine is, where is its place, and how does it feel? Is it different from other countries in that sense? So, Ms. Monica, you have some time for a longer presentation, for 15 minutes. You do have it, and then we'll go directly to the discussion. Ms. Monica, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Many thanks for this invitation. I'm really glad to participate in this panel, as you said, with different perspectives. So I would like just to give a bit introduction on the work that we are doing on measuring the trust in governments and public institutions, and also in trying to understand what are the determinants, what drives trust in governments. We can go to the first slide. So why does it matter? I think it follows quite nicely the survey that you took in the previous keynote session, when the respondents said that for local governments it's very important to invest in good governance and enhancing trust. And indeed, we have many evidence that there is a positive relation between trust and reforms in terms of organization of the government, the territorial organization of it, the legal system, labor market, and so on. In addition, trust promotes compliance with public policies, and we are also seeing this in terms during the COVID-19 pandemic in so many countries, the importance of good trust between governments and citizens in order to comply with all the measures that have been put in place to reduce the spread of the virus. You can go to the next slide. So if we take a first general perspective in terms of the levels of trust, so this is a picture from the Gallup survey, what poll, where you see the level, the percentage of population responding to the question if they have confidence in their national government. And you see that these are the data for the European Central Asia region, and also the average of the OECD. We have in 2019 So before the crisis of the current crisis, only 45% of the OECD population and 48% in the ECA region trust their government. But what is even more important is that this 45% in the case of the OECD and a little bit more than 30% in the case of Ukraine, this comes from values that have fallen very quickly after the economic crisis in 2009, and it took more than 10 years to recover. So the first message to say is that public trust doesn't easily heal. So it takes a long time to recover and to restore trust. And especially there are some regions where for many years trust in public institutions and in governments has been relatively low. We can go to the next slide. So besides the importance of monitoring the levels of trust of citizens in institutions, even more importantly is to understand, what are the main drivers, what are the main determinants influencing trust. So we work with this framework that we can call public trust framework, where identifies 5 main drivers that have to do with the responsiveness of public institutions in providing public services to the citizens at the level that they need. The reliability of public institutions in anticipate and assessing evolving challenges, and then 3 main values of governments, which are the openness, the integrity, and the fairness. So for openness, we mean not only provide information for citizens to understand what the government is doing, but also to develop tools and ways to engage the participation, to facilitate the participation of citizens. For integrity, of course, we mean high standards of behavior of public officials, but also commitment against corruption. And finally, for fairness, relates both to the fairness in the process, but also in the outcome. So a consistent treatment of citizens and business. So we can go to the next slide. So these are the 5 main drivers, and the idea is really to measure how citizens perceive, experience, evaluate their interaction with government, with public sector, with public services. So this survey tries to ask different situational questions, where citizens are asked not only about their perception, so how much they trust different institutions, but also what are their expectations in terms of behavior of the public sector, or what are their experience, and if they are satisfied with the quality of their public services. So when we see the results in the next slide, we can go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So here are some results for 5 countries. Unfortunately, we have not carried out this survey in Ukraine, so I cannot provide you with a specific for Ukraine. But what you see here for 5 countries, for six countries: Finland, Germany, Korea, Italy, Slovenia, and the United States. You see what are the values, the percentage of population that considers its national government to be responsive, reliable, open, integral, and fair. And you see that already among these countries, there is a wide differences. For example, if we look at the results on openness, so to the question whether whether citizens have experienced that the government was open in the sense of giving the space to voice concern, to voice complaints, to understand what was doing. You see that there are wide differences between, for example, the percentage where you have in Finland that there are more than 35% of the population saying positively, about the openness of the government. On the other spectrum, you have in the case of Slovenia, where this percentage is less than 10. So these are the kind of response, the kind of feedback that you have from this survey. And if we look at all the values together for all the countries that we have, in the next slide, if you can go to the next slide, here you see that essentially the dimension of integrity and the dimension of the openness are found to be the most important drivers of trust. So when we put these 5 countries together, what you see that the 2 main important dimensions are the reduction of corruption, integrity, and the second one is openness, or the facilitation for the citizen to participate. We have also the other determinants of institutional trust, such as the satisfaction with the healthcare, the responsiveness, the satisfaction with the welfare benefit, fairness, and reliability. So we can go to the next slide. So this is the framework and type of data that we try to understand. And now, you know, with the COVID crisis, there has been even bigger effort to adapt this framework, not only to different regional contexts, but also to better understand what are the implications of the current crisis that will have an impact on the level of trust between citizens and government. And I want to mention 2 things that I think are relevant for this exchange. The first one has to do with the regional differences, not only across countries, but also within countries. So when we look at the data, when we have data at the level of the regions or localities, we see that there are very large differences in the levels of trust. But also, more importantly, is that the differences that we observe have to do also with the determinants of trust. So, in other words, the determinants of trust in local governments are quite different from the determinants of trust in national government. And in particular, for the local governments, the dimension of responsiveness of the public sector, and so the capacity, satisfaction, the capacity of the public sector to deliver services, but also the satisfaction of citizens with the public service performance is the most important element to be considered for local governments. So this is, of course, very important, not only because local governments are, generally speaking, in many countries, responsible for to deliver a certain number of services, but also because in the European Central Asia region, almost 60% of citizens in 2017 expressed that they worried of not being able to give a good education. So this has also an importance, not only for the services delivered today, but also in terms of the future. In fact, if we go to the next slide, the other point to make is also that when we are measuring trust in institutions, national and local governments, during this pandemic crisis, the way that governments responded to the crisis, the way they handled this crisis also has a different impact on the level of trust of different population groups. And in particular here, we see what are the determinants of, that have motivated, in a sense, the young people in being more trustworthy of the government's actions or less trustworthy. So just to conclude, we can go to the last slide, just to say to thank you and to say that the work that the OECD is trying to do is to increase the comparative evidence across countries, but also, as we saw, trying to understand what are the main determinants of trust also within countries, if there are significant differences between the different levels of government, and also to increase the policy dialogue across countries. And so you can see some links here where you can find the information regarding increasing this dialogue between different communities to understand what governments and society at large can do in order to recover trust for a better recovery and for better development. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Monica. Thank you. It was truly interesting to see how you compare different countries. I'll just give you one question and please give a very short answer. But I think afterwards we'll talk more about it. So coming back to one of your first slides, what I was surprised with. So we do have a certain number of countries, democratic countries like Finland, Germany, with high level of trust. And we can see that Southern European countries and Eastern European countries, let's say Italy, Eastern Europe, everything's not very well with trust. It doesn't go very well. I do think that Ukraine will be there some way at Italian, Slovenian level, maybe less. But we can see authoritarian countries, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, where the level of trust is high, extremely high. And trust to power, trust to state authorities, fabricated and not fabricated, authentic in non-democratic countries. This may not always be a determinant of good governance. It may mean something else, definitely, lack of trust. Maybe this is one of the key elements of the democracy. So we have democratic, developed countries which may not show very good determinant of good governance, but still they are democratic. What do you think about it? What do you think about this discrepancy?
Yeah, a very interesting question. And so I will try to give a short answer that I think has to do, obviously, as you said, is also with the expectations of citizens. So when also the level of development and the level of democracy, and so the aspiration of citizens. So the answer on trusting your government might be also dependent on that. The other element maybe to underline is that obviously this is a broad question that covers so many things, and that's the reason why beyond monitoring just the levels of trust in governments, it's very important to also try to go behind it and see what are the public governance variables that really determines this level of trust, in order to highlight if there are some worrisome signals. So when you do ask questions about satisfaction with public services, with perception of integrity, or with perception of fairness of the public institutions, well, the answer there are quite different, and may shed a light on some of the challenges that the countries are facing.
Так, я усвідомлюю, що я задаю таке дуже філософське питання, але важливо про це.
Thank you for this answer. Let's think about it. And we'll try again to consider this as well. So just a question to Sofia Opatska right now. So let's move to basically Ukrainian situation, Ukrainian context, and actually take Ukrainian context from different perspectives. So Sofia, you do represent one of the most, I'd say, so the universities in Ukraine, Ukrainian Catholic University, this is one of, this is the educational establishment, one of those which has the highest trust. This institution was created from the zero level, it was just created from the scratch, as they say. And maybe there is, we don't have these extra opinions and this corruption-related floor or something like it. So it's not related to corruption anyway. So in your opinion, how do you think trust building in your sector, in educational sector, can we use the example of your university that it's easier to build the trust by creating new institutions from the scratch instead of reforming the old ones? Thank you for this question. Well, I think that generally, well, you somehow partially gave the answer to my question. So trust is easier to build when institution is being built from the scratch. there is this history, as we say, no criminal records, let's say, for this institution. It starts from the 0 point. And I'd liked really much what I liked about Ms. Monica's presentation. You mentioned the models of behavior. The trust is developed by certain models of behavior. And I do think that trust, external trust, is about whether you have this internal trust within the organization. Within our Ukrainian Catholic University, one of the smallest, by the way, in Ukraine, we are very loud, but we are very small anyway. So anyone hears us usually. So we actually used this very clear model of behavior when we were developing, starting from the manager and how does the communication occur, how decisions are made. So we have this we have a lot of bureaucracy at all levels when it comes to decisions making. So of course, the person who is directly responsible, like we may have rectors, we may have the supervisory board, but we have loads and loads of discussions usually for any decisions to be made. And I think this municipality involvement in decision making, this principle shows how transparent it is, how decisions are transparent, whether they are transparent. And then we have transparent interactions with donors, and then we have transparent interactions with parents, with the students as well, and our clients. So with all the stakeholders in our ecosystem. So when we start involving more and more stakeholders to decision-making process, we actually start then expanding this transparency, making it more viral, and accountability as well. So we do work. We have the leadership center in the university, and we use this leadership attitude model. We have like the list of the virtues, and accountability is one of the virtues in the list. And well, our research tells us that accountability in Ukraine, well, not just at the top level, but accountability when it comes to colleagues, to subordinates, it's a big problem in Ukraine. And I do think that in our university, we managed to actually develop this accountability and crave it into the stone, let's say. This accountability, yeah, it's really interesting. So I go back to the question, old institutions or new institutions? Because I truly recognize that with new institutions, it's really easier to create this accountability, actually, to envisage it, because you create the ethics, you create the very spirit, like Kyiv Mohyla Academy, like Catholic University that we have, even the state institutions built from the scratch within the last years. And we talk about anti-corruption agencies and bodies and cultural institutions, decentralization, about these SNAPs, the administrative service centers, but you cannot create all the institutions at nationwide level from the scratch. Prosecution, police, these are very comprehensive structures. It's really hard to destroy it and build it from the scratch. So can we reform it in some way to make old institutions, to push old institutions to this new model? Maybe this model is, of course, easier to use in new ones, but what to do with old ones? It will take more time. Yes, absolutely, we can do it, but actually, this is a very disputable question. So if we look at the time, so to build institution from the scratch, you need time, of course, for building, for construction. But I think this is truly possible. And what is the difficulty? You are not entitled to make any mistakes. You have no right. When institution starts building its reputation with new examples, with new models, as soon as it makes mistake, as soon as it has some errors, intentionally or non-intentionally, people start saying, "Oh, we knew that's going to happen," and again and again and again, they made us fools, and it's really hard with this pressure, just to stay under this pressure. Let's look at Suspilne broadcasting company, TV and radio. We had so many discussions, like. People told like it's easier to build something from the scratch, but it's not that easy. It's not that simple. And when Suspilne is undergoing this transformation process, it's a long-term process. It's really complicated. It's painful. It requires very unpopular decisions sometimes, and it's really hard to make these decisions. But, and we have this pressure. community pressure. When you just make a very, very small mistake somewhere or something unsatisfying for people, people start saying, we are at the same point where we were. So, and again, it's about the management. So managers as individuals, management as the layer in the institution, in any organization. And again, this example and how they present themselves, how they present their concepts and ideas, it's very important to build a trust to institution. Because basically, institutions in Ukraine, they don't have trust. Individuals, they have trust. Personal brands, let's say. And we just need to spread this trust to institutions. So Spilne Broadcasting Company is a very interesting example. I just would like to ask you the following question about it, and you already mentioned it very well. Just briefly, my impressions. Suspilne company and other difficult structured institutions which are really hard to transform, but those which definitely had this spirit of radical transformation from the very beginning. I think community starts asking for results too quickly. Maybe we have the same situation with anti-corruption bodies. People demand changes, but very quickly, please. At the beginning, we need to look how the decision-making models are reformed and transformed. Accountability, again, a wish of institutions to start being accountable and not to demand quick, fast results. It will not happen. Okay, this is absolutely correct. I will even tell you more. So we wrote this book of reforms, as we call it, where we have 12 cases about different reforms in Ukraine. And we actually, the reforms that took place in Ukrainian institution after the Revolution of Dignity happened in 2014. Not all of these are successful cases. Not all of these are success stories. Thank God some of these reforms are ongoing. Some are complete. But again, if we go back to Suspilne Broadcasting Company, as Zora Balasanye, its manager, says, people say, well, in 3 months, we made a revolution in the country, and you cannot change a TV channel. So how can it be? Truly, as a community, as a society, we have very high expectations. And these extremely high expectations, why we have it? Because every time we don't have this pre-expectation evolution. But first, we need to have evolution first and then expectations, not vice versa. We have this pain, constant pain in the society. We just want this pain. We want this tension to go to institutions and push the changes, but not to create extra pressure. Yes, revolution, evolution, reforming. This is all very interesting because revolution is about opposition. It's a big no that you say to someone, but reform is about building. This is the logic. This is some positive dynamic, and it's quite often it's quite complicated. But I'd like to go to Ms. Olena Stashkina. We've already started talking about this philosophic issues. Okay, so Olena, question to you. I'd like to ask you. So don't you think that this problem of trust in Ukrainian community, in Ukrainian society, first of all, is it so dramatic as we describe it? How do you think? Because we always mention it as one of the most dramatic issues. Do we have this really? Is Ukraine one of the most low trust countries in the Europe? So maybe people already got used to that. At the level of, I'd say, generation, they have this fear of being destroyed. And this fear is constantly somewhere in their conscience. And that's why people don't accept reforms. Because people think, like, we have these reforms to be destroyed. I think that you are fully correct, absolutely. And I do think that we do not exaggerate the problem of lacking trust. Not just to be destroyed, but if we take our activities in the past, okay, we did not actually work with our past. We did not heal the injuries that we had in the past. We thought it would somehow be treated on its own. Unfortunately, we still have some of these painful spots, and these painful spots are still like clogging our cardiovascular system, I mean the country's system. And there is no sense to me mention that again, but we never talked about it in public. We cannot have trust in an environment where we had 300 years of colonial pressure, and also, along with it, 100 years, almost 100 years, a little bit less, like 70 years of totalitarian USSR regime. So under these conditions, the only strategy that actually made it possible for us to survive was not to trust. Absolutely stop trusting institutions, because the further you are from the state power, the easier it is for you to survive. And not to trust your environment, even the closest environments. Keep silence. When I'm eating, I'm keeping silence. Yes, what we told our children, not to talk even to their friends, because it was always dangerous to discuss something, to talk. And when they told us not to trust the closest environment, again, it is related to these years of destruction. Because not just the external powers destroyed Ukraine. We had this great famine launched by communists. We had it. This is the part of our history. And we can say that these unlearned lessons, these open injuries, these painful sports, this all gives people the concept of a bad state, failed state, that we can expect nothing of it. We have this imitational democracy. And people were taught during the USSR time that democracy basically is a negative concept. And we can say that in the 90s, still democracy was perceived, even in 2000, was perceived as something negative. People don't know, for example, why do we have the city council, yes? What is the function of the city council? Or the village council, okay? And this story, this narrative of constant destruction, permanent destruction, it formulates, it creates, generates this idea like, I am nothing, I have nothing, I don't want to be bothered, please, I live my life without you. And this is like the nationwide narrative. And this experience must be studied very properly. For us to build trust in future, we need just to let's say, go into these debris of mistrust. So it's very important what you mentioned of institutions. Yes, we know what Monica was mentioning in her presentation. This is very important opinion that apart from democratic legitimacy, we just need good governance along with it. Success of institutions, their accountability, and Ukrainians, it happened, and we had hundreds of years of it. Institutions were destroyed at the grassroots level. And it's really hard within 5, 7, 10 years to change it. And start trusting out of nothing. Start trusting institutions. So is this open nerve that we see, yes? Where we have, where developed Western democracies see institutions as a key, as a component of development. Ukrainians look at institutions like their enemies. So, if this is the correct diagnosis, okay, so how can we actually fight it? How can we change it? Ms. Olena, we just need to handle it. We just need to understand that this is not going to be a fast process. Absolutely. No quantum leaps. Even the change of generations will not give us the drive, will not give the impetus to these processes. But of course, it will not last for like hundreds of years. The first thing what we need to do is that it will not be fast. It will be slower than we expect. Then, the second thing, what I want to mention, do you remember when the war started, we had this very interesting I saw this interesting picture, like love is the verb. The volunteers were using this motto, and the military and all people who were somehow involved in the military operations. So using this metaphor, using this motto, like love is the verb, I can say that trust is a verb, first of all. Let's say a very interesting study was conducted by the Böll Foundation on the security and insecurity perception in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. There was a question like, did you take part in political social activity? 63% of people said no, never. And 10% approximately, they referred to some utility services, 7 were volunteers, 9 were submitting petitions, also some percent took part in demonstrations. And when the researchers asked whether there was any result, generated by your activity. Almost each participation was marked as yes with results. So half of those people who took part in volunteering activity, so we actually had only 1% of, let's say, those who took part in volunteering activity and really felt that this was something useful. So first of all, we need to start moving forward. We need to start acting. Trust is our nationwide problem. But it's not surprising. When we speak that any action backed by the trust gives result. The best institution which actually gives result in cities. Okay, the unions of condominium owners, respondents of the study actually told that these were like the best institutions. So this is the new type of institutions we have in Ukraine, but they actually replaced these utility service offices, and we now have this result. It's clearly demonstrated. It shows that this self-governance type of institution can actually start working, can push the vertical hierarchy, institutional hierarchy, and so on. So it starts from the bottom, and this is a very good example. Thank you so much. And it's really a very important opinion about acting, because what we face in Ukraine, people don't feel that they are subjects. They don't feel, not all people, okay, but many people, they don't feel that they're individually capable of doing something, that their communities and municipalities are capable, and state is not capable as well. And Leda told about self-governance. I'd like to go directly right now to our next speaker, Andrea Colomizer. And actually, he is one of those, let's say, one of the many practitioners. He is a practitioner, and he's a person who's trying to reform the self-governance system in Ukraine. Andrea, taking into account your experience and the municipality experience, this practical experience, so the reform of self-governance system, decentralization reform, are these the components that will actually help us to break this ice of mistrust in Ukraine? Lack of trust to institutions. Do you feel that or not? Well, Volodymyr, so all the speakers had very important messages presented, mentioned concerning trust of people to institutions and state power bodies, and I'm ready to confirm that decentralization actually gave us one of the biggest stimuli within the recent years. It pushed us so hard to start improving the trust level. I speak the trust of people, speak about the trust of people to the local authorities, because the key aim of decentralization process was to improve the delivery of services regardless of whether people actually live, whether they reside, and we are still on the way to this efficient allocation of services within different territories, again, regardless of the location. We speak about the budget capacity. We again came to budget decentralization. We started doing this in 2016. It was a huge impetus, and it gave a lot of opportunities for the self-governance, local self-governance, and then administrative services provision at local level, and also disposal of resources, land plots. So we brought it from central level to local level, and healthcare services improvement, and also medical reform, the primary sector and the secondary sector. The primary and secondary levels were reformed, and they are still, and the reform is still ongoing, of course. Improvement of the trust. We saw the local elections this autumn. The majority of mayors, the majority of heads of councils who directly were at these positions prior to October 25th, they stated their positions. So it all tells us that country is moving again to improvements. We are increasing the trust to institutions, but is this trust to local self-governance, to local authorities or state authorities, central authorities? Still, we need to know what exactly that is, what exactly the trust is. I'll ask this question. I just want to get your answer. How do you feel? Specific examples. Which examples? What can break this ice? minimize this distance. We even have this clear verbalization. People say us, and state power is them. So we have this opposition, us, them, us, them. Okay, so it's already, you know, deeply. It has been put so deeply, like genetically incorporated. So what do you think about it? Okay, I'll just repeat some of the statements presented by the previous speakers, and of course I'll share my own experience and my own considerations, my opinions, what I personally think actually influences the trust. I'll repeat again. And I'll tell that what is really important: transparency of power, accountability of state power bodies, people's involvement in discussions, and generation of proposals to certain decisions the state power makes. And of course, it's clear, we've talked about it, and we need to draw more attention to that. But what I'd like to say again, we need to pay more attention to other factors that actually approach people to state power or vice versa. So just minimizing the distance, what we actually lack right now with local self-governance and some institutions of the top level, they do lack it right now. So again, knowledge level of managers at all levels. So we need to have more, we need to give more knowledge for the managers. So the management of different institutions, we need to have highly skilled professionals with relevant experience, with relevant knowledge, with relevant skills as managers. But unfortunately, we don't see any interest. Young experts, young professionals, they actually are not interested in this. There is no queue. We have so many vacancies at career websites, so nobody wants to go and work in state institutions. Children should be taught what the management is, what the state institution is. We need to tell youth about it. It's really very important, and it's a big window of opportunities. This is the future of the country, and of course the state has to give some positive examples and somehow to popularize the employment in local self-governance or the central state authorities, and then we'll see a different attitude, definitely, to the state power bodies and local authorities. But what is really very important? Well, personal experience. I just want maybe to quote, using my own words. Okay, you all remember this book about the art of war from China. So if you want to win, you must be confident that you will. So you must be confident that you do realize, recognize all the resources that you have and the aims that you set. And you understand your capacity, because what is important? What is important? The result of your activities. And people will trust you if you act, if you just show the results of your work, that if something changes externally, but still people will see that you're making the right decisions. You are fully that you actually stick to the promises that you gave people when you were just a candidate for the position. It's quite usual for Ukraine, unfortunately, that we have this attitude to state power and lack of trust, what was mentioned so many times by the previous speakers. Unfortunately, yes, we do have this problem. It had been formed for many years, and during the elections, people demonstrate their trust, but next day, after the elections, and again, we start talking that state power bodies are not working properly. So we just need to take this, okay, as it is. We do not need to be hysterical about it, because in Singapore, you know, they have this very good saying as you need to listen to the majority that keeps silence and stop listening to the minority that talks a lot. So I just use these principles, and this is actually something that helps me. I'm listening to those I really need to listen, for everyone to see the result, the high-quality result of my activity. So, Andrei, thank you. You mentioned education, and I do think that, again, we go to education, go back, and this will be my last question to Ms. Sofia about education. And then I'd like to ask Ms. Sofia about business, but look what the situation is. So Andriy says that there's a lack of staff. And I think this is somehow related to business topic as well, because businessmen I talk to, my friends, they tell me that in Ukraine, business says we don't have enough personnel. Personnel says we don't have enough vacancies, but basically it's about competence. So don't you think that each reform we have in Ukraine, judiciary, healthcare reform, within these reforms, what we don't stipulate is fundamental educational reform, fundamental educational change. And your integration in, accelerated your integration in educational sector will help us, actually, because we need to look for some internal, creative, tailored, these custom-made approaches to get rid of bureaucracy. When we start thinking about Ukrainian reforms, it's about this lack of strategic vision in educational sector. And this will give birth to trust, actually, because when a student goes to university and he or she faces corruption there at the very beginning, and students usually have this feeling that professors and teachers are not real professors and teachers. They just go there to get some extra money in their pockets. So the students will not generate this trust later. Okay, thank you for the question. It's a big, voluminous one, a comprehensive one. So I'll start with what? Okay, changes and reforms in educational sector. This is not a popular topic in the country. For many years, it wasn't, and nobody wanted even to start digging in that, because taking a spade and digging, because very high expectations want to get it fast. But when we understand that something changes in educational sector, we'll see the result in higher education. It takes 4 years or 6 years. In secondary school, it takes 11 years to see the result. To be honest, for many people, it's really hard to work in educational establishments because you truly need to work there for a long time to see the results of your contributions. Basically, because what is the contribution in education? The development of the student, the development of the child, the adolescent. So what is another problem is that in our country, education has this very important social function. Let's be frank, we don't need so many universities and institutes. We don't need, I don't want to start touching these very painful issues with the secondary education. But there was a lot of oppression, a lot of opposition when schools were merged and when small schools were closed down, because we can understand that from certain social perspective, people usually say that if in the village we have a school, the village is alive. When you close the school, it really becomes harder for people to stay at the village. The social function has been preserved for so long in the country, and the longer just you keep it, the longer the delays with the changes, the bigger the problem is. So, concerning corruption, I do think that this truly is an issue which may be solved at the level of each university. And we truly have some boundaries, some framework that's already set nationwide. If we stick to this framework, if we stick to these principles without destroying it, without actually cancelling the exams, the final exams, so the corruption issue must be solved at the level of educational establishment. These are just very quick responses to your remark, but I'm ready to clarify if it's really necessary. Yes, we talked a lot about education, just maybe we'll touch upon business, which is also important for you as well. And you've been there in this area, Lviv Business School, you are the founder of this institution. So what I'm interested in business. So is there any trust in the business community in Ukraine? Because, yeah, it's clear when we talk that we have lack of trust, it's this feeling of pressure, of feeling of load, and poor people will not have this credit of trust. Poor people don't feel that they are subjects. They don't feel independent and autonomous. In 1990s, Ukrainian business was only evolving as this wild, primitive capitalism, and we had so many people coming into very dirty schemes. But right now, is the trust is the trust being infiltrated in business community? Owners of companies, do they start trusting more to their, let's say, to their peers or to the institutions? Do you see any kind of dynamics? Thank you for this question. Yes, truly, we have this business transformation as well in the country, in the sector as well. So we come from this wild, primitive, unregulated, chaotic capitalism in its worst version, unfortunately. When we come slowly within the recent years, so SMEs, first of all, I'd like to talk about SMEs mainly as a background, because, you know, big business, big corporations, they always have, there are always so many nuances there. But what actually is the foundation of the society, and what is the foundation of the middle class? SMEs. And I think that within the recent years, SMEs have strengthened, and they now have this global perspective. And this is very important because this global view, global perspective, it starts not maybe encouraging, but pushing business to actually start using best practices. If you want to export to external markets, you must fully comply with the standards of the countries which market you're trying to use. If you want to become a partner of a foreign company, you need to use the same rules and the same ethics. So I think this was mainly the reason why business has become this. The business is growing up. It becomes adult. And we started, good practices, best practices are infiltrating into it. And the general opinion of society shifted. In Lviv, we had this study 10 years ago, conducted 10 years ago, about the attitude, about the values of Lviv residents. And there was a question about attitude to business, to businessmen, to entrepreneurs. The attitude was basically just the same like to officials of state bodies, because people think that businessmen, oh, you're like stealing something, you're trying to smuggle something, you have relatives in tax service and so on. Partially it was true. Partially it was like that. But I think that within the last 10 years, business adapted to very difficult situations that we had in the country in 2014 when the war started. We have experienced what Andriy mentioned, that people don't want to take positions in local authorities and state authorities. We have examples when business even invested in programs to train people to actually make, to turn them into officials, professional officials, to start, to employ them in state structures, state institutions. Please don't forget about 2020, because when we started having problems with medical supplies, with hospitals, occupancy, many SMEs invested a lot in healthcare sector. And this is like not the function of business, because business pays taxes. We all do, we all are employed, we all are employees, we pay taxes. This is the state function, but quite often business takes this function because business does not exist in this isolated bubble elsewhere in the space and another galaxy, but business is a part of the municipality. And I think that the attitude is much better than 10 years ago to businessmen. And of course, now they are seen not just as thieves and smugglers, but people who actually turn their faces to social problems. It's all about role models, truly. And I do think that we need to show more of these positive role models in business, in the state service, in the public service, and then more and more people, young people definitely become and simply use role models. It's very interesting. We have this role model of business, role model of the 90s, when you have this excavator role model, when you just drag everything from the loophole out of the state budget, and maybe it happens in the same way, but this is corruption. This is what we call the excavating institutions. So parasites, more of the parasites. And today we have this feeling, truly, that many businesses, they do feel they don't want to take something from the communities, but to give. Not to take, but to give. This is a very huge shift. So Ukrainian business, in your opinion, it still does not trust state authorities, central authorities. COVID-19 pandemic, does it somehow fuel this lack of trust, this mistrust? And the other question, does business start noticing the local authorities? Does business actually trust more to local self-governance or not? I think that truly we have more trust to local self-governance bodies because this is more practical for business, I can say. Look, the COVID-related situation, I know that restaurant owners in Lviv, for example, they actually developed these protocols on their own, and they brought this to the local self-governance bodies, and these protocols were used actually by the state officials later. So this initiative, right now, it gets quicker to the state level than it was before. And you know, again, people know very well in cities, in towns, people know who is who, let's say. They know their neighbors. It's really easy to check the reputations, the images. It becomes more and more transparent, you know, at local level. And business exists. Its existence is based on partnership and trust. You need to enhance partnership and trust. So it's really recommended to actually support this partnership and trust. But it starts from the perception of the values. Today, if we ask many businessmen, who will be your partner? You will get the answer, the one who shares my values. Okay, so I think in general, trust among businessmen, this is a very important thing. It has certain, it's interpreted in practical context. We have alliances, we have clusters, we have unions. In Lviv, we have this IT cluster working perfectly. So companies, IT companies, which are competitors basically, but at the same time, they negotiate. They make a deal because this gives more use and more of a positive effect to the community. So I do think, by the way, 2 years ago in Lviv, we had the Trust Biennale, and businessmen initiated this. So an event where we spoke about the trust, yes, because business, if this is a healthy business, let's say, for business it's important to plan. Maybe this is one of the few institutions, a few subjects which are truly interested in this long-term planning, because we can see that state policy is not about planning. We will see how the local self-governance will plan with more resources later. But business is truly interested in it because its wealth depends on that. Monica, I'd like to go to you right now, and let's take this global level. Again, global perspective. You gave us a very interesting picture, the comparison of countries. And in my head, I'm keeping this in my mind, you know, that separation of trust issue. Even this break, where it's broken, not only with the west-east line, but north-south line as well, within these lines, along these lines. That's why we see this big difference, like, say, between Finland and Italy. Do you see something in dynamic context? So which activities of government or local self-governance bodies, what generates the trust? Can we study that? Can we show it clearly during the research, with comparative research? What exactly generates, gives birth to the trust at the level of governance? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. May I first answer it just with a comment on the your previous point on business and local government, just because it has to do with that. Indeed, we have done an analysis with Andrea Rodriguez Posse, which we have heard right before, that shows that in the regions, in 11 European countries, good local governments limit the negative effect of low productivity due to difficulty to access to credit of SMEs. So in a sense, what you were saying is to say that good governance at the local level, good institutions at the local level can also overcome a business environment for SMEs that can be difficult. And to that, one of the drivers of trust that we look is also the whether people and so also business believe that the government provides the conditions to be treated fairly and consistently. And so also in terms of the sustainability of business. So I think that also this element that was already recalled indeed is something that we observe. To go back to your question regarding whether, because of these large differences also between, North European countries and Southern Europe countries in terms of levels of trust, what are the elements that we can say that generate trust or distrust towards institutions. I think you have said already many of those, including the fact that there is a national context, that there is a history, if there is a history also of failures in terms of institutions, this of course brings a legacy. On trust. However, as I show, our evidence really points to two things. One has to do with the competence of government. So competence meaning really the capacity to provide services everywhere to the need of the citizen according to the expectations that we have. These expectations are also growing. And the other thing has to do with the values. It's true, as you said before, that reforms, seeing the benefits of reforms take time. At the same time, what we see as a real determinant of trust is the perception of integrity, lack of corruption, and openness of government. So when we say, so these are the two elements that at least the evidence shows that are really important in that, and also that, with integrity and openness, of course, we mean also what was already said by the other speakers in terms of the accountability of institutions. And so, in a sense, what are the values according to which the governments behave and carry out policies and reforms.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you. And what you talk about trust to institutions and factors. So it's quite an interesting populism paradox. So I don't know if you see this clear connection between these societies where we have the low level of trust to government and the level of populism. So, is there any connection or the level of how successful the populist parties are? Because the paradox is where exactly the less trust we have to government, we somehow start trusting to these loud populists who give very, very simplified recipes, but people still trust them. I don't know. And this lack of trust to government, they try to project it somehow. They have this surplus of trust. This extra trust is given to populists.
Indeed. There is not only the question of monitoring and measuring trust in government, but also somehow to measure the distrust that people have towards government and the mistrust, because these are two quite different concepts. So distrust and mistrust is not just the absence of trust. And so how, these trustful people, in a sense, how also of course, what's the role of the misinformation and also in creating and creating in a very fast pace these exchanges regard that increase distrust in institutions. So obviously, distrust in public institutions, populism, but also polarization of opinions are all linked phenomena. Quite difficult to understand how to intervene in the different aspects of it, but definitely with important to monitor, important to provide evidence, but also to provide, in a sense, another form of communication. Even during this pandemic crisis, some countries have actively attempt to provide a scientific communication, a unitary communication from the government with a plain language, to be very clear, also as an attempt to fight against misinformation, fight against this kind of polarization and populism.
Thank you, Monica, for your answer. And the same question now goes to Ms. Elena. Okay, a similar question. So, this paradox. Okay, maybe we make a mistake saying that Ukraine is a society with low level of trust. But again, we have so many elements in our society where we have too much trust. Unexpectedly, we have a proficit of trust, surplus of trust, and not very properly analyzed without critical thinking. I can give examples where people vote quite often trusting too much and having this unbelievable faith in something truly unbelievable, not just the last year election, but this year election. So Andriy told about this victory of mayors. So how do we evaluate it, positively or negatively? Because I do have this impression that, well, when I see the quality of decisions, when I see certain decisions and activities performed by certain mayors, I will not give you the names. People vote for them as for something less dangerous, and let's say a danger, a pain you already experienced without any wish to get some new pain. So we still may have this problem that the lack of trust we have to institutions in the country, still we can see that there is a certain resource of trust in a person, and this resource is just wasted. Like, people are blindfoldingly throwing their trust away to different politicians, not the best ones, I guess. I think this is a very complicated issue, maybe even more difficult than we think. This ability to fall in love, you know, into any chair, into any piece of furniture and put it as your president or a mayor, this is the reverse side of the trust. What is the logic? What is logic? I don't expect to have anything good from any kind of state institution. Therefore, if I have no alternative, I have no hope. Basically, it doesn't matter who will be there stealing my money or stealing the budget. But if I try to have faith in this miracle, let this miracle happen. If it doesn't happen, actually, we won't have anything worse than this, because everyone is the same. Okay, I think this is it's a phenomenon of vicious circle, truly vicious circle, where this lack of trust somehow generates the surplus of trust to anyone. And again, we have this lack of trust because we don't have proper leadership and we don't have proper managers anyway. We are discouraged, and people who had this faith in miracle, later they'll say, we always knew that's gonna fail, like everything is the same. So I do think we need to think of it. The nature of populism in Ukraine, despite that it is fully reconciled with the global trend, there are some truly national roots, domestic roots. Remember this formula presented by Lenin. that a maid can rule the state. Well, but and this confidence, this concept that you need nothing to manage the country, but just be a good guy or a good girl, you know? So this, again, is another trauma of our past. And we need to fix this trauma. We need still to put some extra bandages on it, because Trump is not our phenomenon. Trump voters actually knew what they get. And voters, those voters we have in Ukraine, we only have people who have faith in some miracles, and they all have this faith that one person will come and fight everything. So it's not about the amount of trust, it's about the correct allocation of trust, or balance between critical thinking and trust. And it's really very, very interesting difference between faith and trust. I don't know in other languages, like, do we have these notions as very similar? So trust and faith is not the same thing. Trust is about analyzing, about critical thinking. It's pragmatic. It's a pragmatic concept. I told you that it's a verb, it's about information, it's about experience. Trust is an institutional value. Faith is okay, faith is a faith, it's irrational, it's something we really try to rely on. So another dangerous thing I see related to decentralization, we can say that this is the dark side of decentralization, because truly this process gives a lot of positive outcomes for the state, because we're searching for these dynamics, internal dynamics in municipalities. But there is a big risk. We saw this risk at local elections, trying to compare the region and the center, these two levels. And we understand that in our country, this opposition, this comparison, would we have this external aggression. We have territories illegally occupied and annexed, the Crimea, districts of our eastern regions. We have the hybrid war, which highlights these trends, and even enhancing the trends. Do you see any danger of it right now? Maybe when we're trying to accelerate this trend. Lack of trust to Kiev, meaning to the central authority, when people start thinking that Kiev is like the center of evil. So I just see the danger in the sense that this trend is used by our enemy, by the aggressor, by Russian Federation. And actually, it seems to me that Ukraine, as a state, as a society, we demonstrated much more resilience and much more unity. And we couldn't even imagine it ourselves. And we actually did not meet the expectations of Moscow as well with that. So there is quite a huge danger in it, but I'd like to underline one of the mistakes of the Russian Federation in this war. What was the mistake? Their mistake. They thought that Donetsk and Lugansk regions, they really thought that these regions are definitely pro-Russian, that people will definitely stand for Russian occupants. But this is the same that we have in Estonia. Just imagine if one day we wake up and we see that all Estonian population is gone. Of course, we would study this phenomenon. Where did, like, millions of people, almost 2 million of people, where did they go, like, if they vanished? But when we talk about Donetsk and Lugansk region, when we mention that 1.5 million people left these regions, we don't see this as a phenomenon. This is not a phenomenon. It simply means that Ukraine appeared to have more unity. We are more pro-Ukrainian than we thought, you know. And it was really important for me to mention this, and I'm really glad I did. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Elena. I agree so much with you. But even when we have these trends, when we have these vicious trends, still they are not stronger than trends of consolidation, of unity. We can see it in the sociological surveys, but we have these attempts, external attempts to use it, you know, for which purposes. But I'd like to say that we are almost out of time. Dear To our audience, there is a proposal to ask questions, and I'd like to ask Mr. Andrea a question. We have a couple of questions, maybe definitely in the scope of his competence. So first question, what should local authority do to raise the trust?
First of all, something needs to be done that I've explained about before. It's about the maximum openness of the government institutions at a respective level. We need to be able to communicate with residents, to invite and involve them in decisions making, in discussion of whatever issues we have to discuss. We need to have them on board when designing of projects of importance for them, whether social or bigger infrastructural ones. And actually, we need to update our communication channels and capacities. In my community, we've updated also our website so people can put questions online, sign online petitions. They can get some information at their fingertips, and information necessary for them, say, related to the pandemics, to healthcare opportunities. So in a way, we try to make good use of internet possibilities. Definitely, it requires good coverage. And I think many communities actually work on that across the country. And we are being helped with cell phone operators, regional level governments, like in my region, the oblast level administration actively contributes to expanding of coverage, telecommunications coverage of Kirovohrad region. We also use radio broadcasting. We do periodic informations, we do videos, and we air them at local TV, at local radio stations, trying to tap into the issues of interest, of importance for local residents. We also have good cooperation with local media, printed media in particular. We do our best to print and circulate whatever bit of information we have. We also have our own information news bulletin that we circulate in our community. This is about the set of possibilities that every administrator, every head of community has, and these possibilities should be used to their max. In terms of what else can be offered and used, well, you should provide people with information through as many channels as you can, whether these will be like stands with information, whether it will be some info points, get closer to people and provide some feedback opportunities, whether through some advertising boards or whatever. Yeah, that's quite interesting what you've just said about communication and media involvement, because I think there are still many people in Ukraine watching national TV channels, and there are people who are much better versed in national policy than elsewhere. So my question to Andrei, will we see change in the level of trust in the community if the pandemics continue, if war and conflicts continue, or otherwise, I would put, do you think that these conflict-related situations lead to an increase of trust in the government? I would not support this idea, because at the beginning of this pandemic, the government clearly was not ready for it, and I'd say that local self-governments in the majority were among the first responders. They took the brunt of it among the first. And local governments were also commissioned to have businesses on board to help with hospitals, redesign and restocking to better respond to the pandemic. We saw how local budgets started delivering funds for some sanitary measures, anti-pandemic measures, and local self-governments were tasked with providing PPE to hospitals, to primary healthcare institutions. And I think that many local community leaders took this as an opportunity to better communicate with the residents, keeping them informed about the situation, COVID situation, measures taken, precautions to be taken. Also to expand the plans of the local government, of the central government to respond to the pandemic, measures taken or to be taken in their education, school schedule, etc. So whatever we say, we still see populism very much widespread in Ukraine. It has been, it is, and it will persist in Ukraine, unfortunately. So in this respect, no drastic changes in sight. In terms of the pandemic, I'd say that the local government authorities will do the best to increase the level of trust people have in them. But, well, we need to understand that whenever people see some slack from the government, whatever level government we mean, people will be quick to note it. And actually, those who will be closer to local residents, who will be better able to react to their needs and to make something in their best interest, will enjoy more trust. Thank you, Andrea. Now my question to Monica. What is the level of correlation between the support and trust to the government? Put otherwise, do you think that people may still hold trust in the government even if in disagreement with the actions that government offers? Still otherwise, how it is possible that I will still trust in my government if I'm not in agreement, if I do not agree with the government?
Well, I think that when we talk about trust in government, of course, there is a certain degree of vagueness, if you want, whether we are talking about the political leadership or we are talking the machinery of government and therefore also public institutions and the public administrations. But actually, when we do ask this question, this is not just one question, and so people distinguish between the different aspects. And so I think that, yes, you can still have trust in the capacity of the government in delivering services or in conducting policy making in a correct, consistent way, although you may be skeptical regarding the guiding values or the political views of the government, and so you may not trust the political leadership. I think that these are two distinct, of course, interrelated but still distinct ways of looking at the question of trust in institutions.
Thank you so much, Monica. I think we are ready to wrap up our panel. We've been able to discuss lots of things. We were able to look into matters of international importance and level, having a bird's flight view of situation also in Ukraine, try to compare this country with other countries. We try to look into what is happening the most basic level, the one of local self-government in Ukraine. And we're able to tap into several important topics of education, business, institutional development, and I hope we were finally able to provide a sort of 3D model of Ukraine's prospects. And there's certain relation between the words in Ukrainian related to faith and trust. It's like la credenza in Italian. This probably has something. I'd like to thank everyone. We've had together with us Monica Brezzi, head of the Indicators Comparison Department from OECD. Thank you, Monica, for that. We also had a representative of the Ukrainian Business School from the Ukrainian Catholic University. Olena, thank you. Elena Stashkina, thank you. You represented National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, and Andrea Colomizer, head of the Priutivska territorial community. Many thanks to you as well. Thank you, and we are ready to give the floor over to Yevhen.